SC race season is upon us, so in this video I'm going to review my 2022 truck Procaliber 9.5. I have about 250 miles and about 20 hours of ride time on this bike right now, and the local front range trails have dried out enough here in Colorado to really put it to the test. And as you can see, the bike is not as clean and pristine as it was the last time you saw it, so I've definitely been out using it in the dirt. So stay tuned as I give you my full feedback on how the bike has performed and any upgrades I may have planned for it. Before we get into the actual performance of the bike, I just wanted to do a real quick high-level overview of the bike itself. The bike is still completely stock with the exception of the change of the saddle. I haven't even changed out the grips on it yet. I'm still running the stock Bontrager XR2 2.25 inch tires, which are set up tubeless. One thing I did do right from the beginning, which I do on pretty much all my bikes, is I did add some frame protection. So I added some on the down tube and on the seat tube and in this bottom bracket area as well, just to protect it from rock strikes and things like that. As a pure cross-country race bike, this bike does have very classic geometry with a 68.8 degree head tube angle. One of the major features of the bike's frame design is the ISO-Speed, which is a decoupling mechanism, which I'll talk about more in detail shortly here. This bike does feature Shimano's new 1x12 Dior drivetrain, and the derailleur does have a clutch lockout, which I have used in this video for the trail rides. And as it turns out, I've been really impressed with the Shimano Dior 1x12 performance, especially compared to the 1x11 Dior I've had on prior bikes. The bike does feature Shimano hydraulic disc brakes with 180mm in the front and 160mm in the rear, and I've been really happy with the performance of these as well. So in this bike you get a really high quality carbon frame and a solid low to low mid part spec for a little over $2,200. So let's get into the performance and ride characteristics and cut in some actual video of me riding the bike. This bike is a size large, which feels really good to me. Being a true carbon hardtail with a beefy bottom bracket, it does pedal exceptionally well. You can really feel the bike launch forward with every pedal stroke, and it does really well when climbing, whether you're in the saddle or out of the saddle. So despite being a stiff and responsive carbon frame bike, it really is quite comfortable, and that's mainly attributed to the ISO-Speed. So what ISO-Speed is a decoupling mechanism that separates the seat tube from the top tube. So there's no moving parts or shock or anything like that. It just allows more flex in the seat tube. So the goal in providing that flex and compliance is just to reduce rider fatigue. And I've been wanting to try an ISO-Speed bike for a long time because I was really curious if it was just marketing or kind of a gimmick or if it really had some valid benefits. And I can say I do really feel like it does really make a big difference. And while it is in no way like having actual rear suspension, I do think it does a really good job of cutting down on that high frequency vibration that you feel on some types of riding. And over time I do think it makes you feel fresher toward the end of a long ride. And probably the best explanation I can give to what it does or what it feels like, it kind of gives me the same sensation if you had put a larger rear tire on, and when you go up in tire size, tire volume, you just get a little more of that supple compliance. And that's how I feel with this bike. I do feel like it actually has a larger rear tire than it actually does. In fact, in this recent trail riding I did for this video, I came down a really rock steep section at speed, and toward the bottom of that feature, when I was actually back on the seat, I really thought I might have a tire going down, but it turned out to be not the case. I didn't lose any air at all. So all I can really attribute it to is the ISO-Speed and not feeling nearly as rough as I expected. So back to just more the general ride characteristics of the bike. It has been really fast and efficient on the climbs, and the bike feels super nimble and is easy to get airborne if that's what you want to do. And I've also found the bike to be really fast and efficient on single track at speed, and I'm actually really looking forward to still getting out there and pushing its limits on some more aggressive single track here in Colorado, really seeing what it can do. And with these smaller, fast-rolling tires set up tubeless, I've really enjoyed the bike using it just as a gravel grinder. It's been really fast and efficient for that type of riding as well. And again, the ISO-Speed has done a really great job of numbing that high-frequency buzz that you get riding gravel at speed. So after discussing all those good things and positive attributes of the bike, I did want to discuss probably the main performance factor as far as the components go, and that's the front fork, which is the RockShox Judy. The Judy is definitely at the low end of the RockShox range of forks, and being on a pure cross-country hardtail, it's 100mm of travel, and the staunches are 30mm in diameter. It is an air spring fork. It does have basic adjustments for rebound, and it does have a pretty standard dial selector to run it fully open or fully locked out. In my initial first look video of this bike, which I have linked down below if you want to dive much deeper into the spec of the bike, I did express serious reservations about the fork choice and indicated I was pretty much dead set on replacing it. On dirt road and gravel rides, the fork performance has been adequate, but I'll actually come back to that a little bit later. Riding this fork on the trail, it's actually been a pleasant surprise. In that earlier video, I also mentioned that it appeared to be that the lockout to fully open dial was somewhat progressive, but now having some miles and some hours into the bike and riding it on some actual trails and experimenting with it, I feel like it only really performs well at either end of the spectrum, so either fully locked out or fully open. again. It seems like anywhere in between, it is not progressive or predictable, and it just doesn't really perform well, which is a disappointment because other forks I've had are very progressive and linear in that dial. You can really use it to set it depending on the terrain to get the appropriate amount of responsiveness out of the fork for the terrain you're riding in that section. For the first several weeks I owned the bike, we were in the dead of winter, so I was mostly riding it on dirt roads and pavement, and with the fork locked out, it did really well in that scenario. But on the trail in full open mode, the fork has really exceeded my expectations. I've used a number of lower end forks on bikes in the past, and they were always pretty awful on true trail riding. And even my RockShox Recon on my 2015 Stash, which was more of a midline fork at that time, performed only slightly better than the low end forks. But in the rough terrain at speed, I've been really impressed with the plushness of the fork and the fast responsiveness of it as well. It's done a really impressive job at its price point as a low end fork. So despite all that praise on its performance on the trail, I do still see myself replacing it. And really the primary reason is for weight savings. It is an extremely heavy fork. Going up to more of a mid or upper mid fork like the RockShox Reba that I have on my Canyon Exceed, that change alone would shave 1.5 pounds off the bike, which is pretty substantial. And going back to that higher speed, higher frequency gravel riding I mentioned earlier, that's one area where the fork doesn't really perform particularly well. For that type of riding, the higher quality forks definitely do better at that small bump, high speed compliance. And at higher speed, they also steer much better because they have more stability with the larger 32mm stanchions and the lighter weight. So despite being pleasantly surprised in the trail performance and not being an absolute deal breaker, I do see the fork as still being a worthy upgrade. So speaking of upgrades, what do I plan to do with this bike? So as I've already covered in great detail, the fork would probably be the first thing and the major upgrade on the bike for all the reasons I explained. Not necessarily an upgrade, but something I do plan to change are the pedals. The Race Face Chester flat pedals are kind of my go-to. I use them on all my fat bikes and love them, and they're really good on this bike too. But I do have a set of clipless mountain bike pedals that I am going to install on this bike and start using, since it will be used on higher speed rides for gravel, things like that, and of course true cross-country trail riding. One thing I see is a possibility, but not till I know for sure, would be a dropper seat post. I would probably only consider that after I get a full season of riding in it and determine if it's really something that's going to be a value add for the way I'm riding this bike or not. You really got to justify the performance gains of the dropper versus the weight that you're going to add to it by adding a dropper to the bike. And speaking of weight, I don't really have any major changes or upgrades planned other than that. I may at some point do a lighter stem and a set of carbon bars. That's probably about the extent of it. I'm actually really pleased with the bike overall and don't see myself beyond the fork as a major upgrade doing much else to the bike. Maybe after a year or two, that would be a time to invest more money into it and maybe look at wheels or something like that. And the way I'm using the bike right now, I'm actually really happy with these tires. So I have no plans to swap them out proactively, but when they do wear out, I may change to something different and or maybe even consider different sizes depending on how the bike is getting used. But right now I'm really enjoying the fast rolling, light, smaller tire size. I think it suits this type of bike really well, so for the foreseeable future, I'm just going to stick with it. So in closing, has this bike met my expectations? And I would give it a resounding yes. I've been very pleased, very impressed with the bike as a package. It's been a very strong, enjoyable performer on mixed use rides and light trail use. And again, I'm really excited to get it out and really push its limits to see how good it is. At its price point and the type of bike it is, I can give it a solid 8 out of 10. And I think swapping to a better fork would probably bump that up to a 9+. So definitely stay tuned. I have a lot more content coming with this bike. The next time you see it in one of my videos is probably going to be a head-to-head comparison with my Canyon Exceed. And in that video, I will also explain why I have both. And probably at the end of the season, or maybe I'll wait to the 1 year mark, I'll do a long-term review wrapping up the bike and how it's performed, especially after I've done any of those upgrades I've discussed, and see if they were really worth the investment. So if you found any value in this video, please drop a like down below. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, definitely drop those down in the comments down below. If you found this video or my content in general helpful or entertaining, please subscribe to the channel. It does really help out. It really is the best way to stay on top of and follow any of my bike adventures. And there's a lot planned for this summer, so definitely stay tuned. So thanks a lot and have a great day.